Imagine it. The year is 1818. After years of the Napoleonic Wars and the War of 1812, the United States was finally in a position of regrouping. But it wasn't quite in the clear yet, or in the black, I should say. Welcome to the first financial panic of the United States. The Panic of 1819 was the first widespread economic downturn that the United States has experienced thus far, which impacted a tremendous amount of citizens. And this is also a time when the United States is trying to expand west. Well, the thought of expanding west had to be put on pause when the economy failed. But how did we get here in the first place? To be fair, it wasn't just the United States who was suffering. After years of war against Napoleon, Europe itself was in kind of a bind. During the war, they were in overproduction mode. But in peacetime, they were trying to adjust for what that meant, both for production and for business and for citizens. But what was happening was now there was a surplus. And because finances weren't super great, people weren't able to absorb the surplus. And so that caused problems. And after years of overproduction in agriculture, the land wasn't really performing well either. So people were hungry and they were inundated with too much stuff that they couldn't sell. So it was a bit of a crisis. While the United States was across the ocean, we might as well have been next door because the effects of the wars were hitting our shores too. Because we had overproduced and we couldn't get rid of some of our things. And our factories were having to shut down because the going rate for the items we were trying to sell was below competitive rates, so they weren't making enough money to stay in business. But what we did have plenty of were crops, and they were crops that Europe desperately needed due to their agricultural situation. So for 3 years leading up to 1818, there was a boom in crops and money. With this new bubble of money that popped up, people wanted to, of course, do what they always do when money is burning a hole in their pocket. They wanted to spend it. Well, thanks to the first Bank of the United States failing, the Republicans pushed for very little oversight over the next bank, the second Bank of the United States, when it opened. And they were successful. If you ever wanted a loan, this was the time to get it because there was very little keeping you from money when it came to lending practices of these banks. No one was paying too much attention to the fact that the money reserves were absolutely depleting. And by 1817, there were 19 branches of the Second Bank of the United States. With no real oversight, many people were flocking to the banks to get loans, mainly to go west. The United States had opened up land west to purchase for as little as $2 an acre when you purchase 160 acres minimum, which would be the equivalent of $320, which today would be about $8,000. The deal also hinged on the fact that the purchaser of the land would have to put down a quarter of the price, which was $80 or about $2,000 in today's money. By 1818, land debt was up to $17 million, or nearly $500 million today. It was around this time that Europe stopped depending so much on the United States for crops. It was also the same time that they stopped using the United States for cotton and started buying cotton from India instead. So by summer, the Second Bank of the United States backed off a bit from issuing credit so fast, as well as they stopped accepting state-chartered bank notes, like this one here from Georgia. State banks were being forced to send coins, and they didn't have it. So then they started going after the heavily mortgaged land, and the farmers were really cash poor. So banks, and when the land at this point was like dropping in value by up to 75%. So the banks, unable to collect and unable to send cash money, were just foreclosing on everything and sending those properties to the Second Bank of the United States. Then, one fateful day in January of 1819, the value of cotton dropped 25%. This one-day event took a country that was tiptoeing on a fence to falling right into the recession yard. The Panic of 1819 had hit. The same guy that put a stop to issuing credit and forcing the banknote situation resigned, even though he had already taken steps to remedy the panic that he saw coming. At this point, Langdon Cheves was promoted to president of the Second Bank in replacing William Jones. He implemented what was referred to as stern procedures. In essence, he saved the banks a lot of money. He fixed the financial crisis for the banks, but deepened the depression. A quote describing the situation came from someone who experienced it as, "The bank was saved, but the people were ruined." In 1821, the Relief for Public Land Debtors Act was passed, and this gave some help for people who were those farmers who had mortgaged the land and had lost it. So these people were given land that they had paid for. So if they had paid for half of their loan, then they got to keep half of the land, and half of the land was returned to the government. They were also given new repayment schedules, which allowed for smaller payments over more months. This was a very popular bill, and in places where the farmers were hit especially hard, those states would make even more relief measures. Another interesting result of the panic was Texas. During the panic, a large number of Americans picked up and moved to what was then Mexico. And the numbers over a decade swelled up to over 12,000 Americans living in Mexico, which would become the Republic of Texas, eventually a state. 200 years later, the panic is viewed as America's first foray into the modern business cycle. For more political events during James Monroe's presidency, please check back for the episode on his tenure.